The sun had not risen that morning. Thick grey clouds covered the sky like a burial cloth, and the birds that normally sang before dawn were silent. In the village of Iduoma, such a morning was a bad sign, an omen whispered among old women and feared by the young. In a small mud brick hut at the edge of the village, a young girl named Nwakigo lay on a woven mat, drenched in sweat and shaking in pain. Her hands clawed at the floor as wave after wave of labor pain tore through her. "Hold on, my child, just a little longer," said Mama Neka, the village's oldest and most trusted midwife. Her hands moved quickly, her wrinkled face calm but her eyes filled with worry. She had delivered over 100 babies in her time, but none like this. Nwakigo was only 18. Sweet and quiet, she was the daughter of Obiajulu, a bitter woman known more for her long silences than for kindness. They lived alone. Her father had died when she was young, and Nwakigo had grown up dreaming of escaping the village one day. But everything changed the day she met Isaac. Isaac had come from a nearby town. Handsome, charming, and full of stories, he swept into Nwakigo's life like a storm. He promised her love, whispered of city lights, and gave her gifts no village boy could afford. Within a few months, she was with child. And now, that child was trying to come into the world, but something wasn't right. "Push, Nwakigo, push," Mama Neka urged. "One more time." Nwakigo screamed, her voice echoing through the empty morning like a ghost wailing through the trees. Her mother, Obiajulu, sat in the corner, hands gripping her wrapper tightly, her lips whispering silent prayers. Then, silence. For a moment, the whole hut fell still. Even the wind outside paused, as if the world was holding its breath. And then, a sound. Not a baby's cry. Not the joyful wail of new life. But a strange, humming noise. Low, deep, and vibrating. Mama Neka's eyes widened as she looked between Nwakigo's legs. She froze. "What is it?" Obiajulu asked, rising quickly. But Mama Neka didn't answer. Her mouth fell open, her hand trembling. There, where a newborn should have been, was something else. It was small, round, and covered in thin layers of reddish flesh, like a glowing egg pulsing with life. It gave off a soft light, beating like a heart, and hummed gently with every breath Nwakigo took. Mama Neka reached out slowly, her fingers hesitant. She touched it and pulled back. "It's warm," she whispered. "Alive." Nwakigo collapsed back, unconscious, her body limp. Obiajulu rushed to her side, panicking. "My child. What have they done to you? What is this thing?" The midwife gently wrapped the object in white cloth, her hands shaking. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Because in all her years, all her training, all her experience, she had never seen anything like it. By midday, the village was in an uproar. Word spread quickly. Nwakigo gave birth to something, not a child, not a creature, but a glowing thing. They said it pulsed like a heartbeat, like it was alive. Some called it a curse. Others called it a gift. Most didn't know what to call it at all. Men gathered at the square, whispering. Women avoided the family compound. Children were told not to go near Nwakigo's house. The air was thick with fear. Mama Neka placed the wrapped object in a clay pot, sealed it, and hid it deep in her hut. She didn't want anyone to see it, not yet. Not until she understood what it was. That night, Nwakigo finally opened her eyes. "Mama," she whispered weakly. Obiajulu rushed to her side. "I'm here, my child." "My baby, is it a boy or girl?" she asked, trying to smile through her pain. Obiajulu looked away. "Rest. We'll talk later." But Nwakigo sat up suddenly, her eyes wide. "Where is Isaac?" Obiajulu hesitated. "He was gone. Vanished the same morning of the birth." No one had seen him. No goodbyes, no footprints, no trace. As if he had melted into the shadows. That night, the clouds remained heavy, and rain refused to fall. But something else came. The animals began to cry. Goats kicked at their ropes. Chickens screamed until their voices broke. Dogs howled endlessly, their eyes wide with terror. And then, in the heart of the night, Mama Neka awoke from a terrible dream. In it, she stood in a field of fire. A voice called out her name, not from the sky, but from below the ground. When she opened her eyes, she felt cold, even though the firewood still burned. She went to the pot where the object was hidden. The lid had cracked. Inside, the glowing object was humming louder. And around it, faintly glowing on the cloth, were markings, ancient symbols she had seen only once before. The next morning, Mama Neka went to the village elder. She carried the cracked lid and her heavy heart. "This is no ordinary birth," she said. "This is not of medicine. This is a spiritual birth." The elder frowned, stroking his white beard. "Do you think it's a curse?" Mama Neka shook her head. "No. Not yet. But something dark is coming. I must seek the forest shrine. The old spirits may have answers." The elder nodded slowly. "Go. But be careful, Neka. Some spirits should not be woken." Back at home, Mokigo stood before the mirror. Her shirt lifted slightly, revealing her belly. A symbol had appeared, glowing faintly, almost like a tattoo, but it was moving, pulsing gently in rhythm with her heartbeat. She touched it with shaking fingers, and as she did, a whisper passed through the air. "You are the chosen vessel." Her heart stopped. She turned. But there was no one behind her. The village of Idoma had known many strange things, floods that came too early, children born with extra fingers, animals speaking in dreams, but never anything like this. Nwakigo, the quiet girl with soft eyes and gentler smiles, had become the talk of every compound. Not just because of the birth, but because of what the birth had left behind. The thing wrapped in cloth. The light that glowed. The silence of her vanished lover. But there was something else now, something more terrifying. A mark had appeared on her body. It looked like a tattoo, but none made by man. It paused just above her belly, shaped like an open eye surrounded by tiny branches. It didn't stay still. It moved when she breathed. Kando, the midwife's journey. Mama Neka walked into the forest before the sun had risen. The earth was wet, and the leaves whispered secrets only the wind could understand. She walked with bare feet, carrying nothing but a calabash filled with white chalk and a single kola nut. Her destination was the forest shrine of Okija, a forbidden place only the old midwives still remembered. Long ago, it had been the home of Boba Ikemba, a spirit priest who was said to speak with the ancestors and the unborn. After hours of walking, she reached the shrine. There it stood, half swallowed by vines, forgotten by time. Stone figures of headless beings lined the path, their carved mouths wide open in silent screams. She stepped forward, heart pounding. "Great spirits," she said, falling to her knees, "I come in peace. I bring a mystery that only you can solve." She placed the kola nut on a flat rock and broke it. Then she waited. The wind stopped. The forest grew quiet. And then, from the darkness of the shrine, a voice came. "You bring the egg of the forbidden one." Mama Neka shivered. "I did not mean to." It came through the girl, Nwakigo. "She is the vessel. She was chosen long ago. Before her mother. Before her mother's mother." The voice was not human. It was the sound of tree roots cracking and bones twisting. "She bears the mark of the eye. The watcher. The one who must never be born again. New moon secrets in the bloodline." Back in the village, Nwakigo sat with her mother, Obiajulu. "Mama," she whispered, "what is this thing inside me? What is happening to me?" Obiajulu shook her head, tears in her eyes. "I should have told you long ago." "Told me what?" Obiajulu stood and walked to a locked chest. She pulled out an old cloth and unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a small carving, a woman giving birth, surrounded by black flames. "This carving was passed to me by your grandmother. She told me never to speak of it." Nwakigo stared. "What does it mean?" Obiajulu looked away. "Our bloodline carries an old curse. Long ago, one of our ancestors made a deal with the forest spirits. She was a barren queen. She begged for a child. They gave her one, but made her the first vessel. That line passed from woman to woman, skipping generations, until now." "You mean I was meant to?" Nwakigo's voice broke. "Yes," her mother said softly. "You were always marked. I hoped it would never awaken. But the moment you let Isaac into your life, it began." Nwakigo's hands trembled. "Isaac, he never said anything." Obiajulu's eyes narrowed. "That boy came here too easily. He had money no young man should have. I warned you, but you were too blinded by love, warning rumors and restlessness." By evening, fear had taken root in the hearts of the villagers. Men avoided Nwakigo's compound. Women whispered behind their hands. Children were told not to speak her name aloud. "The mark is evil," they said. "She carries a demon egg," another added. "She must be sent away," one elder murmured. But nobody said it loud enough for Mama Neka to hear. They knew better. Mama Neka returned to the village late that night, her clothes soaked from forest dew. She went straight to Nwakigo's home. "We need to talk," she said quietly. Inside, she took out a chalk stone and began to draw symbols on the wall, protection signs from the ancient language. "The spirits have spoken," she said. "This is no normal birth. The object is a spirit egg, a vessel meant to bring an ancient force back into this world." Nwakigo gasped. "What kind of force?" "The kind that once walked among gods and swallowed whole villages. It was defeated and banished. But it waits for a door to return. And you are that door." Obiajulu fell to her knees. "Is there nothing we can do?" "There is," Mama Neka said, her voice calm. "But it will not be easy. Snake a visitor in the night." Later that night, Nwakigo couldn't sleep. She stepped outside to get some air. The moon was full, shining silver over the palm trees. Crickets sang quietly. Then, movement. A shadow between the trees. "Who's there?" she called, her voice shaking. From the darkness, Isaac stepped out. He looked different, thinner, eyes sunken, clothes dirty. His hands trembled as he stepped forward. "Nwakigo," he said, "I didn't know. I didn't mean for this to happen." She stared at him, confused, angry, terrified. "Where did you go?" He looked down. "They came for me, in my dreams. They said I had a role to play. That I needed to bring them someone pure." She took a step back. "You used me?" Tears filled his eyes. "I thought it was just a ritual. Just words. I didn't know it would awaken the egg. I didn't know you were the vessel." She screamed, loud and full of pain. Obiajulu and Mama Neka rushed outside. Isaac looked at them, fear in his eyes. "Please, I want to fix it. I swear. I'll do anything." Mama Neka stepped forward. "Then you come with me. To the shrine. To confess." Isaac nodded, shaking. But behind them, deep in the darkness of the trees, something else moved. Something watching. Something waiting. The forest had always been a place of quiet power, where old gods whispered and the living dared not speak too loud. But that morning, as Mama Neka, Nwakigo, and Isaac walked through the narrow path leading to the shrine of Okija, the silence was unnatural. Even the birds refused to sing. The air was thick and heavy, like something unseen was pressing down on their shoulders. Isaac walked with his head low, guilt etched into every step. Nwakigo stayed close to Mama Neka, her face pale, her breath shaky. She hadn't spoken much since the night before. The truth had broken something inside her. Still, she walked forward. Because whatever had been put inside her needed to be stopped. Kanda arrival at the shrine. The shrine looked ancient, older than memory itself. Giant stones carved with symbols surrounded a circular pit. In the center stood a tall wooden pole wrapped in torn red cloth. Animal skulls hung from it, swaying gently though there was no wind. A low voice greeted them. "I see you have returned, Mama Neka," said Baba Ikemba, the shrine priest. He stood barefoot, his white beard long, his eyes blind but shining. Though he could not see, it was said he could hear even the secrets in your blood. "I bring the vessel," Mama Neka said. He nodded slowly. "And the betrayer walks beside her." Isaac dropped to his knees. "Forgive me. I was promised only wealth. I didn't know." "Silence," Baba Ikemba said sharply. "You knew. You may not have known all, but you knew enough. And you took the path anyway." He turned to Nwakigo. "You," he said softly, "carry more than life. You carry the key to a prison made long before this land had names." Nwakigo looked down. "What is it that I carry?" "A spirit egg," he said. "Not a demon. Not a god. But something in between. It is called Oduma, the watcher between worlds. Long ago, it was worshipped, until it demanded blood. Then it was trapped, sealed by the sacrifice of 7 maidens." He stepped closer, his voice trembling with ancient fear. "That egg is its rebirth. And you are the final door. Drop of blood, the forbidden pact." Isaac shook as he confessed. "I met a man from the far town of Humans. He told me I could have everything I dreamed of, wealth, cars, power. All I had to do was bring him someone pure. Someone who hadn't known a man before." He looked at Nwakigo with shame. "I lied to you. I took you to the shrine in the bush that night. I gave you a drink. I said it was love, but it was part of the ritual." Tears fell down Nwakigo's cheeks. "Why me?" Isaac bowed his head. "Because you trusted me." Baba Ikemba nodded. "He broke the natural bond of love and turned it into a weapon. That is the true curse." Mama Neka stepped forward. "So what do we do now?" "The egg must be frozen," the priest said. "We cannot destroy it, not yet, but we can stop it from hatching. That requires a powerful ritual. One that needs 3 things: fire from the cleansing flame, water from the mouth of the hills, and a willing sacrifice." "A sacrifice?" Nwakigo asked, voice shaking. "Yes," Baba Ikemba said gently. "Someone must offer their soul to hold the spirit egg in place." Isaac stood suddenly. "Let it be me." Everyone turned to him. "I did this," he said. "Let me give something back. Let me freeze it. Let me carry the punishment." Baba Ikemba studied him. "The spirits may accept your offer. But be warned, once you make the sacrifice, there is no returning. Your life will not end, but you will never be whole again." Isaac nodded. "I'm ready." I had the freezing ritual. That night, under the light of a red moon, they gathered at the shrine. Baba Ikemba drew circles in white chalk, placed herbs in burning pots, and whispered words that had not been heard in 100 years. The spirit egg, still wrapped in the old cloth, now glowed fiercely. It was hot to the touch, and it hummed like a drumbeat, louder than before. The 3 items were brought. Fire from a sacred pot that never died. Water from the hill of 7 mouths. And Isaac, standing barefoot in the circle, ready to give his soul. Baba Ekemba chanted. Drums began to beat in the distance, though no drummer could be seen. Wind whipped around them. The egg cracked once. Twice. Then, Baba Ekemba shouted, "Now!" Isaac screamed as fire touched his chest. The flames didn't burn skin, but something deeper. He fell to the ground, shaking violently. The egg pulsed wildly, then stopped. A sudden stillness fell. The glow dimmed. The egg was quiet. Frozen. For now. Crying face aftermath. Isaac lay on the ground, his eyes open, his body alive, but his soul was missing something. He looked at Nokigo, tears in his empty eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. She knelt beside him. "So am I." Mama Neko wrapped the egg in white cloth and sealed it in a clay pot again. "We must bury it deep. Far from here." Baba Ekembe nodded. "But be warned, this is not the end. The spirit will not stop. It will search. It will wait. And one day, it may try to return." Nokigo stood, stronger now. "Let it come," she said softly. "I am not afraid anymore." To be continued. Fire coming next. Part 4, The Lover's Secret. Nokigo begins to hear voices. The egg is not as frozen as they thought. And the village must prepare, because something is waking. The village of Idoma breathed easier after the freezing ritual. The skies cleared, the animals grew quiet again, and for a few brief days, it seemed like the world had returned to normal. But peace, like morning dew, never lasted long in a land where old spirits still watched from the shadows. Nokigo had not spoken much since Isaac's sacrifice. She spent her days inside her mother's hut, staring at the walls, her fingers tracing the invisible mark still glowing faintly on her belly. The egg was buried, Isaac had offered his soul, and the ritual was done, but something deep inside her told her it wasn't over. Because at night, when the village slept, she heard whispering. New moon, the whisper in the dark. The first time it happened, she thought it was a dream. A soft voice, smooth and deep, calling her name. "Nokigo. You are still mine." She sat up in bed, heart pounding. Obiajulu, fast asleep beside her, stirred but didn't wake. Nokigo lit a small clay lamp and looked around. The room was empty. Silent. She closed her eyes and listened. Nothing. But the moment she blew out the flame, the voice returned. "Do not be afraid. I am part of you now." She screamed. The village begins to change. By the next week, strange signs began to return. A goat gave birth to a 2-headed kid. A tree near the shrine bled sap the color of blood. Children reported seeing a tall, shadowy figure at the edge of the forest at night. The elders gathered again in fear. "We froze the egg," said one. "Yes," Mama Neko agreed. "But the spirit may still have a link to the girl." The bond was never broken, only delayed. Baba Ekemba was summoned from the forest once more. He arrived with red chalk on his face and bones around his neck. "She hears the voice, doesn't she?" he asked. Mama Neko nodded slowly. "Yes. It speaks to her in the night." The egg was only part of the spirit, the old priest said. The other half lives in her blood. Magnifying glass tilted left Isaac's hidden truth. While the village debated what to do, Isaac remained in silence. He sat under the shade of a tree, barely speaking, eating only when forced. His body was there, but his spirit had gone somewhere else. Mama Neko visited him one evening. "Do you regret it?" she asked. He looked up slowly. "Every day. But not because I gave my soul." "Then why?" Isaac swallowed hard. Because I only told half the truth. Mama Neka narrowed her eyes. What do you mean? Isaac sighed. The man I met in Humans, he wasn't just a ritualist. He was a servant of Oduma. A living priest of the Watcher Spirit. He said, the egg was only a seed. That after the vessel was prepared, the true awakening would come. He looked away, voice trembling. And he said something else, that once the spirit knows your name, it never forgets. Crystal ball the mark rose. Nwakigo's mark had started spreading. No longer a small symbol above her belly, it now snaked up her side, branches stretching like vines. It glowed softly at night, even under her clothes. One morning, she woke with blood on her pillow. Her nose had bled during the night, and her dreams had been filled with fire. Obiajulu wept quietly as she watched her daughter's body change. This spirit wants her, she whispered to Mama Neka. And it will not stop until it takes her fully. Mama Neka agreed. It is time, she said. We must separate the girl from the spirit once and for all. The bond must be broken. Nazara Millet preparing the soul cutting ritual. Baba Ekemba called for a sacred ritual, the soul cutting. It was rare. Dangerous. Only performed when a spirit had rooted itself inside the living. It required 4 steps. The mirror bath, to reveal the spirit's reflection. The truth fire, to burn away all lies and false names. The circle of voices, where the village would chant the girl's real name in unity. The final cut, a spiritual severing, done with the bone blade of a dead twin. The ritual must be performed before the next full moon, Baba Ekemba said. Or the spirit will fully awaken within her. Warning, one last warning. That night, Nwakigo sat under the moon, alone. She heard the voice again. But this time, it didn't whisper. It roared. You dare to cut me out? I gave you power. I gave you life. Without me, you are nothing. She clutched her head, tears rolling down her cheeks. You tricked me, she cried. No. I chose you. You are the only one strong enough to carry me. We are one now. Nwakigo screamed. Her voice echoed across the village. Lights came on in nearby huts. Obiajulu ran outside. But by the time they reached her, Nwakigo had collapsed in the dirt. On her back, glowing bright red, was the full symbol of Oduma, complete now. Mama Neka gasped. It has begun, she whispered. We must do the ritual now. Or she will be lost. The full moon hung low over Iduma, heavy and red like a bleeding wound in the sky. It cast long shadows across the huts and trees, and everything seemed to hold its breath. Tonight was the night. The night they would attempt the soul-cutting ritual to save Nwakigo from the spirit growing inside her. Inside her mother's hut, Nwakigo sat in silence. Her skin was pale, and her eyes no longer held the innocence of a village girl. The mark of Oduma now stretched across her entire torso, riding like living roots under her skin. She no longer cried. She no longer slept. She simply watched. And sometimes, when she spoke, it wasn't her voice. Fire preparing the ritual grounds. At the edge of the village, near the great Iroko tree, the villagers gathered. The elders had cleared a wide circle in the earth. In the center was a bowl of firewood arranged in a spiral, surrounded by chalk symbols drawn from the old tongue, the forgotten language of the ancestors. Baba Ekemba stood tall, his blind eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. His staff thudded against the earth as he walked. This is the last chance, he said. If we fail, the spirit will take her, and then come for all of us. 4 items were placed before him. A mirror filled with river water for the mirror bath. A pot of red flame from the truth fire. A cow horn for the circle of voices. And the bone blade of Ijoma, a twin who had died before birth and whose bone was said to cut even spirits. Mama Neka, Obiajulu, and a dozen other villagers stood ready, fear tightening their throats. The drummers began to play. The ritual had begun. Droplet Step 1, the mirror bath. Nwakigo was brought forward, her feet dragging. She didn't resist, but her eyes were glowing softly, and a cold smile curled her lips. "Is this the vessel you bring?" she whispered. "She's not strong enough. Let me grow inside her. Let me finish what was started." "Silence," Baba Ekemba commanded. He dipped a leaf in the mirror water and sprinkled it on Nwakigo's face. The mirror rippled, not like water, but like glass bending. And there, in the reflection, they saw it. A dark figure behind Nwakigo, tall, with limbs like smoke, and eyes like burning coal. Some villagers screamed. One fainted. "It sees us," Mama Neka gasped. "The spirit is awake." Baba Ekemba nodded grimly. "Then we must move quickly." Fire Step 2, the truth fire. The flame was brought closer. A leaf soaked in oil was lit and waved before Nwakigo. The fire glowed bright red, and then blue, then black. The spirit within her laughed. "You think you can burn me out? I've lived longer than your gods." But the fire hissed and leapt, forming shapes in the air, names. Old names. Ancient names. And finally, Nwakigo's true name appeared in flame. Chimare. God has won. She gasped, stumbling backward, the spirit inside her roaring. "That name is not yours," it howled. But Baba Ekemba shouted, "It is her name. Her real name. Say it." And the villagers raised their voices, chanting together. Chimare. 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 Speaker high volume Step 3, the circle of voices. They stood in a ring around her, men and women, old and young, chanting the name that belonged to her soul. Each time they said it, the mark on her body cracked a little more. The light inside her dimmed. Her knees buckled, but she remained standing. Obiajulu held her daughter's hands. "Come back to me, my child. You are not a vessel. You are not a prison. You are mine. You are Chimare." For a moment, the spirit's grip loosened. Nwakigo blinked. She saw her mother. She saw the villagers. She saw herself again. But then. Step 4, the final cut. The bone blade was placed in Baba Ekemba's hand. He stepped forward, slow and steady. "I must cut the spirit from your soul," he said. "It will hurt. But it will set you free." Nwakigo nodded. Her lips trembled. "Do it." As the blade touched her chest, right above her heart, a great scream burst from her mouth, not hers, but the spirit's. "No. I will not go. She is mine." The ground shook. The drums stopped. Wind howled through the circle. The fire rose high into the sky. Baba Ekemba pressed the blade. A final scream. And then, silence. Dove the spirit is cut. Nwakigo collapsed. The mark on her body turned to ash and blew away. The clay pot where the spirit egg had been buried cracked in the distance and shattered, releasing a black smoke that vanished into the night. The villagers stood frozen. Then slowly, one by one, they dropped to their knees in praise and relief. Baba Ekemba dropped the bone blade. It had turned black. "The spirit is gone," he said. Mama Neka wept openly. Obiajulu held her daughter tightly, rocking her like a baby. "She's free," she whispered. "My child is free." Warning, but the shadows still watch. Far away, deep in the forest, a pair of eyes opened. They had watched everything. The spirit had been cut out. But a new door had been opened in the process. And something even older than Oduma now stirred the village of Idoma was quiet again. The winds that had once screamed through the trees were now soft breezes. The skies had returned to their bright blue. Children laughed once more. Goats roamed without panic. The spirit egg had been destroyed, and Nokigo, Chimari, was free. Or so they thought. Because evil never truly dies. It only waits. Some behind small cloud celebration in the village. It had been 7 days since the soul-cutting ritual. The villagers held a small festival to give thanks to the ancestors for saving Chimari's life. There was drumming, dancing, roasted yam, and palm wine. Women wore their best wrappers. Men told stories around the fire. And in the center of it all, Chimari sat beside her mother and Mama Neka, smiling weakly. She was still healing. Physically and spiritually, but for the first time in weeks, she felt peace. Baba Ekemba did not attend the feast. He sat alone at the shrine, whispering prayers and pouring libation. He had felt it. That something else had awoken. That the battle wasn't over. New moon, the shadow that returned. That night, while the village slept, Baba Ekemba dreamed. He stood in a burning forest. Above him flew dark birds with eyes like coals. In the center of the fire stood a woman. Her body was made of smoke. Her face was Chimari's. But her eyes were not her own. Then a voice spoke, ancient, cold, echoing across time. You cut Oduma from her, but in doing so, you called me. I am the one who watches from beyond Oduma. I am what your ancestors feared before fear had a name. Baba Ekemba woke in a cold sweat. For the first time in decades, he trembled. The final ritual, he whispered. It must be done. Or we will lose everything. Scroll, a new force rises. He called an urgent meeting of the village elders the next morning. We made a mistake, he said. Oduma was not the final spirit. It was only the gatekeeper. The gatekeeper to what? Asked one elder. To a deeper darkness, a forgotten force known only in fragments of oral stories. One called a Jijoka, the silent one. The spirit of silence, shadows, and sacrifice. He turned to Mama Neka. When we cut Oduma from Chimari, it left something behind. An emptiness, a door still open. Kanda Chimari's struggle. Chimari's dreams had returned. But they were different now. In them, she stood in a black river, surrounded by stillness. No voices, no birds, no breath. Just watching eyes. And always, a whisper she couldn't quite hear. Mama Neka watched her closely. You're changing again, she said one evening. Chimari nodded. I feel it. Something cold. Like it's inside my chest. Not alive, not dead. Just there. She looked into Mama Neka's eyes. Did we wake something worse? Drop of blood, the final ritual is revealed. Baba Ekemba called Mama Neka and Chimari into the shrine. He held a faded scroll made of bark. This, he said, is one of the oldest rites. Passed only from priest to priest. It is called the binding of the Hollow One. He looked at Chimari. The only way to stop a Jijoka from entering this world is to seal the door with a soul that was once touched by the first spirit, but not claimed by it. You mean me? Chimari said. Yes, he said. You are the only one who can bind it. But you must make a choice. Balance scale the choice. Baba Ekemba explained. There were 2 ways to perform the final ritual. The blood binding. Chimari offers her soul permanently, she will become a spiritual gatekeeper, never fully alive again, forever trapped between worlds, but the door will be closed for good. The sacrifice of kin. One of her blood relatives, her mother, offers their life and spirit in her place. The door closes, but the risk remains that another door may open again someday. Chimari turned to her mother, Obiajulu. Obiajulu's eyes filled with tears. "I will do it," she said. "I brought you into this world. I will not watch you be taken again." Chimari fell to her knees. "No. I won't let you die for me." Full moon under the full moon. The decision was made. They would perform the final ritual at the base of the old tree of silence, where the air itself refused to carry sound. That night, the villagers gathered one last time. No drumming. No dancing. Just firelight and prayer. Chimari stood in the center of the circle, wearing white, her face painted with ash. Mama Neka stood beside her, holding a gourd of sacred oil. Baba Ekemba chanted words so old, the wind seemed to pause to listen. When he raised the bone blade again, he looked into Chimari's eyes. "Which path do you choose?" Chimari breathed in deeply. Then softly, clearly. "I choose the blood binding. Let it be me." Obiajulu wept silently. But her daughter stood tall, crossed towards the binding. As the bone blade touched her chest again, a storm of wind exploded around them. Fire danced. Shadows hissed. A black crack split the earth beneath her feet. From within it rose the face of Ejijioka, formless, faceless, but terrible. "You bind me now," it said. "But I will wait. In your bones. In your shadow. I will wait." Then, with a great cry, Chimari fell. And the crack sealed shut. Dove after the ritual. She did not die. But she was not the same. Her eyes now saw things no one else could see. Her voice was soft but carried weight. She walked among the living, but her soul touched both sides of the world. She became the new spirit keeper of Idoma. The girl who once carried a curse, now became the one who held it back from others. The sky over Idoma was brighter than it had been in years. The birds returned to their morning songs. The rivers flowed clearly again. Children played beneath mango trees, and laughter once more danced through the dusty village air. The darkness was gone. But so was the girl they had once known. Ab the spirit keeper. Chimari, once Mokigo, the shy daughter of Obiajulu, was no longer just a girl. She had become the spirit keeper, a living bridge between the world of the living and the shadows beyond. She still walked among them. She still greeted the elders with a bow. She still helped Mama Neka gather herbs and deliver babies. But her eyes now held the weight of centuries. People said she no longer slept. Others claimed her shadow moved even when she stood still. But one thing was certain, the evil had been bound, and Chimari was its keeper. Kanda remembering the past. The villagers built a shrine under the old tree of silence, in honor of the spirits who had passed through their land and the girl who had stood against them. On the wall of the shrine was carved a simple message. "Here stands the one who chose the pain of many, so others may know peace." Every season, mothers brought their children to the shrine. They told them the story, how darkness entered through love, how betrayal invited the spirits, and how one girl gave up her soul to protect them all. Chimari sat quietly during these retellings, never correcting them, never adding or removing a word. She knew the truth didn't need to be loud. It only needed to be remembered. Cloud within Obiajulu's quiet strength. Obiajulu never fully recovered from what her daughter had become, but she was proud. Proud of the girl she had raised. Proud of the sacrifice that had saved them. She spent her days cooking for orphans, tending to sick elders, and sitting on her mat with her rosary beads, whispering quiet prayers. One evening, she asked Chimari, "Do you ever wish you had chosen the other path? Let me go instead." Chimari looked at her mother with the faintest smile. "No, Mama. Because if you had left, who would have reminded me who I was?" Obiajulu wept softly, and the two held each other as the sun set behind the hills. Crystal ball echoes of the spirit. Years passed. The younger generation came to know Chimari not as a cursed girl or a miracle child, but as a legend. Some believed she was immortal. Others thought she was a goddess in disguise. But to the elders, she was still that soft-spoken girl who once loved the boy too deeply, trusted too quickly, and bled too much for a village that hadn't earned her sacrifice. Still, she remained. Watching. Guarding. Listening to the thin veil between this world and the next. Because the crack had been sealed, but not erased. And somewhere, deep in the folds of time and shadow, the spirit still whispered. Sunwit faced the new dawn. One bright morning, as the sun rose golden over the palm trees, a little girl named Ifunanya ran barefoot to the edge of the village. She had heard stories of the spirit keeper, but never seen her. She found Chimari kneeling by the river, her white wrapper glowing in the morning light. "Are you the woman from the story?" Ifunanya asked, eyes wide. Chimari turned, smiled gently. "Which story?" "The one where a girl gave her soul to save us." Chimari looked up at the sky, the clouds moving like soft feathers. "Yes," she said. "But it's not just my story anymore." She reached out and touched the girl's chest. "It's in you now. In all of you. Every time you choose love instead of fear, truth instead of greed, you carry the light I fought for." Ifunanya tilted her head. "Will the bad spirits come back?" Chimari's smile faded, but her eyes remained calm. "They always try," she said. "But now, you know how to fight." Of the final words. That evening, the wind picked up. It danced through the village square, ruffled the shrunk cloths, and whispered through the huts. Some say it spoke. Others say it sang. But those who listened closely heard one final message from the spirit keeper of Idoma. Light does not scream. It does not roar. It simply shines. And that is enough to chase darkness away.